August 20th, 1862. Mrs. Hurd was out milking the cattle when the Indians arrived. Dakota warriors. It was common for Dakota to come around asking for handouts, so she believed them when they said they just wanted to talk. Mrs. Hurd brought them into her cabin, where they found Mr. Voigt. Feigning friendship, they asked for some tobacco. It was important to maintain good relations, so he gave them some. Just as they began to smoke, Mrs. Hurd's baby began to cry. Voigt picked up the baby to soothe him and casually walked him into the yard. As he turned to come back to the cabin, he was met with a pistol aimed at his chest. Before he could even figure out what was happening, the gun fired and Voigt fell to the ground. The baby, remarkably unharmed, fell with the dead man to the ground and began to cry. Mrs. Hurd was frozen, terror-stricken. The Indians, a moment ago friendly, just killed the family's helper. The Dakota immediately started to ransack the home, taking everything of value and destroying everything else. The baby was screaming. One of the warriors walked up to Mrs. Hurd and told her to leave. He told her to take the baby and the other children. He pointed to the direction that he wanted her to travel. He told her that if she moved to the south to warn her neighbors, he would kill her. The warriors wanted to move in that direction unimpeded. Their goal was to kill off all the white men in the country. Welcome to Dates and Dead Guys. It's relatable to experience the kind of self-doubt that hardships and trauma leave you with. You don't have to have survived the Dakota War to get that. The decisions you make in your everyday life can leave you second-guessing yourself, or feeling stuck or drained. These patterns are hard to break. They get ingrained in us from our past. But with the proper support, we can release the weight and make the kind of changes that leave us more self-assured and ready to move on and advance. Therapy does this for a lot of people, which is why I am proud for today's sponsor, BetterHelp. They have simplified therapy to make it accessible online in your own home. They do it by matching you with a licensed therapist for unbiased and helpful advice. All you need to do is complete a questionnaire, and you'll be connected within a few days. If the therapist they have matched you with doesn't fit what you're looking for, they make it easy to switch anytime. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/datesanddeadguys for 10% off your first month. Sometimes everybody needs someone to talk to, and BetterHelp is here for you. But let's get back to our story. In 1861, Lavina Eastlick was just 28 years old. Her and her husband John had just moved to Lake Shetek in Minnesota with their 5 sons. It was a paradise, a 5-mile lake north to south. There were only 11 settlers on it when the Eastlicks arrived, but it was steadily growing into a nice little community. Their small farm was a perfect place to raise their sons. It could be lonely, but Lavina would often visit her neighbors. To the south of them lived the Everetts. In mid-August, Lavina went to drop off some butter that she had made. On the way, she saw a few teepees that had been erected next to the Wright's cabin. Indians were not uncommon in the area. They were resigned to territory north of the new settlement, but they would often come out to the markets or to the farms to beg for food or tobacco. Initially, this made Lavina uneasy, but she grew accustomed to the visitors, and to keep them happy, the Eastlicks would usually share something with them when they came by. John was more cautious. He talked to others on the lake frequently about the need for a fort closer to them. He was always aware when there were tensions on the reservations with the Indians. But these visitors were friendly enough. One of the Indians Lavina recognized, Pawn, called out to her. She had seen him around several times. He said ho ho ho, a greeting, like how do you do. Lavina came over and they chatted for a little while. Pawn told her that his small group of Indians was on a buffalo hunt, as he petted and admired Lavina's horse. But she felt like Pawn was acting strange, like he was far more interested in her horse than he was in talking to her. But it was just a feeling. 2 days later, on Wednesday, Lavina Eastlick was back home, making breakfast for her family. It took a lot of work and a lot of food to feed her 5 sons. The oldest was 11-year-old Merton, but there was also Frank and Freddie, Giles, and 15-month-old baby Johnny. It was a nice morning. John watched his boys as he petted his loyal dog. Merton was playing by the window when he called out to his parents, saying that someone was running toward their cabin. Before John could get up to even open the door, Charlie Hatch, their neighbor, burst through it. Breathing heavy, with panic on his face, he shouted to them, "The Indians are upon us." Charlie lived with the Everetts just a little bit to the south, the same family that Lavina had visited to bring butter to just 2 days prior. Her mind was racing as both her and John sat there dumbfounded. She remembered Pawn outside of the Wrights' cabin. Charlie explained that he was on an errand to the north part of the lake and discovered the body of Voight in the field. Voight had been shot at the herd cabin. Charlie rode his horse fast to the south to warn as many others as he could. His explanation gave them just enough time to come out of their stupor. John sprung into action. He grabbed their 2 rifles and little Johnny, the baby. He told Lavina to grab the other boys and some powder and shot. Lavina panicked and tried to grab some clothes. John knocked them out of her hands because they had to go right now. She felt stupid. Of course they did. They didn't have a moment to spare. She did think it was a little bit harsh when John pushed her out the door before she could even put on her shoes. So the Eastlick family left their home, and they thanked God that the Indians hadn't arrived yet. John and Lavina, who was barefoot, carried baby Johnny. The dog came too. He was always glued to John, but carried nothing. Lavina was slow without shoes, but held onto John's coat to help her keep pace. He was moving so fast. She begged him to slow down, but he knew that he couldn't. The Indians could be on them at any moment. The other 4 boys, led by Merton, kept up just fine, but they had shoes. There were not many houses on the lake. Their plan was to go to one of the houses south of them, the Smiths. But when they got there, they didn't find anybody, so they went further. The Smiths had already gotten word of the attack and fled, and the Eastlicks actually caught up to them and continued on to the next house. The Wrights, Pawn, and the other Indians were still camping there. Lavina didn't know what to think, but they called over the Smiths and the Eastlick family. The Indians seemed afraid. One of the Dakota women wept when she learned about what was happening. Pawn told John that he would fight with them against the Indians that were attacking the settlers. More settlers from around the lake began to gather at the Wrights' cabin, like the Dooleys and Irelands. Both lived north of the Eastlicks. Both had stories about how the Indians had attacked them. Tommy Ireland only escaped because after shooting at him and his family, they stopped to plunder his cabin. But there were more people than that missing. Willie Dooley, Tommy Ireland, and Pawn left to look for the stragglers that hadn't made it yet. They found Mrs. Koch, whose husband had been killed. Lavina embraced her as she sobbed. In an awkward attempt to comfort her, she told her that perhaps that night John would be killed too, and that would be even worse because Lavina had 5 kids and Mrs. Koch had no children. The men at the Wright cabin prepared to defend it. The women were given axes and butcher knives and sent upstairs. Pawn and the other friendly Indians were kept out of the house. They had said that they would fight for the settlers, but John and the other men didn't completely trust them. The settlers did give them some ammunition when they said they didn't have any. Without it, they knew they wouldn't be useful in any fight. Lavina remembered the way that Pawn had looked at her horse a couple days before and told John that she didn't trust the Indians. John tried to calm her. He didn't trust them either, but said they had no better option. The raiding party had just arrived, and they were on horseback at the edge of the field. Prior to the attack on Lake Shetek in August of 1862, the government had failed to honor annuities and rations to the Indian tribes in Minnesota. The Dakota didn't care that the Civil War was going on. These annuities had been promised. When they gave up their land to the United States, they gave up the ability to feed themselves. They were starving. The land they had didn't have enough game for them, and over 170,000 settlers had used up what was left outside of their reservation. As the United States expanded, groups like the Dakota felt pressure to sign treaties that guaranteed their survival. As Minnesota became a state in 1858, the Dakota were forced away from their homes as settlers poured into their territory. Things were getting tense between the government officials and the Dakota. And when they met in early August, it was clear the U.S. government wasn't going to be able to provide what they needed. Local traders, white settlers, were asked to help, to give the Dakota food on credit. Famously, a trader at this meeting, Andrew Myrick, refused. He stated, "As far as I am concerned, if they are hungry, let them eat grass or their own dung." War didn't break out immediately, but after being told, while starving, to eat your own shit, it didn't take long. When the war broke out, one of the places the raiders went first was Lake Shetek. At first, the Dakota War Party didn't do much. They watched. Then they started to circle the cabin. Occasionally, one of the warriors would ride out into the field and fire his gun into the air. Other times, they would ride into the pasture and kill one of the cattle. Pawn told the men defending the cabin that they should all fire at once, that showing the attackers so many guns would show that they were dangerous. The war party would be frightened away. When they went to fire together, the white men did, but the Indian defenders didn't. Their rifles stayed loaded. Pawn told them that they should do it again. Lavina thought this was a trick, that their Indian defenders wanted the white men to empty their guns, that the Indians would not fire with them again. and the settlers would be defenseless. The first time was either practice, to see if the white men would fire, or maybe Pawn and the others were too cowardly to act. But instead, Pawn volunteered to go talk to the war party. As he walked out, a number of warriors rode out to meet him. They talked in private for a time, and then Pawn came back to the cabin with a message. They were told that the attackers had 200 warriors, and that the settlers would be allowed to peacefully go away. The warriors were not after these settlers, but if they didn't leave, they would burn down the cabin they used for protection with it still over their heads. So their choice was to stay and ultimately burn, or to leave their only source of protection. What a choice. It is unclear in the narratives whether or not the settlers knew that being forced to leave their fortification, the cabin in this case, was a common tactic in raids. Indian warfare was never the kind where forces would line up and maneuver, the kind where both sides would take a lot of casualties, but eventually one would get the upper hand and come out on top. Indians fought from advantage, unless they were forced to do something else. So when the Lake Shetek settlers left the right cabin, they were giving the Dakota exactly what they wanted: the ability to ride up on them later as they were moving, get them in a less defended location, and tear them apart. The settlers weren't dumb. Even if they didn't know this was common, they had to have known that this could happen to them. It may have been their better choice either way. Regardless, Lavina, John, their boys, and the other settlers started making their way down the road, trying to make it to Fort Ridgely. There were 34 of them in total, not including the Indians like Pawn camped outside the right cabin. They didn't come, but rather stayed behind. The settlers assumed that they would be left alone by the war party. The settlers did have a wagon that most of the women and children were able to sit in. Lavina, her two oldest sons, Merton, Frank, and the men walked. Which is strange, because again, Lavina didn't have shoes. They hadn't traveled a mile before their worst fear was realized. Behind them, they heard the galloping hooves of horses and the Dakota war cry. Lavina later wrote, "All was terror and consternation among us. Our merciless foes were in sight, riding at their utmost speed, and would soon be upon us." The riders abandoned their wagon, hoping that the Indians would raid it for supplies, and they would be able to escape. As the settlers ran, the Indians stayed out of rifle range, whooping and yelling at the scared settlers. Lavina said they were like demons. The men argued whether or not to shoot at the Indians, but John made the decision for the group when he shot the first Indian to touch one of their horses. The Indians sent a volley back at the group, but hit no one. Willie Dooley led the group into a swamp, or slough, with high grass, hoping for concealment. It was mostly dry, as it hadn't rained much that summer. As they ran, Lavina was shot in the heel of her foot. Others were injured as well. They dove into the high grass to hide from their pursuers, hoping their guns would keep them at a distance. Tall grass offers concealment, but not protection. Bullets passed right through the grasses that hid them. If their enemies kept up the attack, it would only be a matter of time before they were all dead. To this day, the spot is known as the Slaughter Slough. For 2 hours, the fleeing settlers hid in the swamp. John had problems keeping his rifle firing. He had wet powder. From a nearby hilltop, the Indians would take turns firing down into the slough. After one's rifle was empty, they would skulk back behind the hills to safety. Lavina wrote, "We felt that we were but weakly protected, but we could expect no mercy from our inhuman enemy. We all knew that death or captivity was before us, and I had no idea that any of our company would escape them. Balls fell around us like hail." This went on for so long that Lavina said she could tell if a bullet hit someone by the sound it made. Her boys huddled around her in the grass. Every move she made, they stayed with her, terrified out of their minds. Merton, Frank, Freddie, Giles, and baby Johnny. Just boys. For 2 hours, the only sounds they heard were gunshots and the groans of the injured. Another Indian made an appearance at the top of the hill, and his bullet hit Lavina in her side. A moment later, maybe a ricochet, hit her in the head. The bullet lodged between her skull and scalp. John asked if she was okay. She bled profusely. She thought she was going to die. John bravely attempted to defend his family, but his position was discovered. And the next time he raised his rifle to fire another shot, a rifle cracked, and Lavina heard the sound. The different sound. She called out to her husband, but all she could hear was a faint groan. She tried to move to him, but another survivor told her that he was already dead. It was now clear to the Indians that the defense from the slough was failing. The settlers were nearly out of ammunition, and most were dead or injured. From the hilltop, they heard a familiar voice. Pawn. He started calling for the women and children to come out, just as Lavina had feared. He had betrayed them. He had always intended to betray them. Tommy Ireland stood up to beg for their lives. He was immediately shot through the chest and arm. He fell instantly. Pawn promised not to kill anyone else if they just did what they were told. Slowly, the women and children started to raise. Lavina was amazed. More were alive than she thought. She started to go with them, but she stopped at her husband's body before she left. He laid face down, with his hand over his face, his loyal dog still at his side, watching over his lifeless body. Moving on her feet now, Lavina realized how injured she really was. As Merton carried baby Johnny, her other sons, Frank and Giles, helped her to walk. As she moved, she saw Tommy's wife praying over her husband. He was alive, but clearly dying. The sky was overcast, and it started to pour. The Indians began working quickly to get their supplies and captives in order. Everyone expected to be taken captive, but the Indians were more sinister than that. As Lavina was held by an Indian, she called for her son Freddie, just 5 years old. When he rose out of the grass, an old Indian woman beat him with a club, and then stabbed him on the ground several times. Lavina could only watch as he was murdered. Next, Frank called out to his mother. During the melee, he had been shot through the mouth, bowels, and thigh. She wasn't able to go to him. Watching her children suffer, she didn't even realize the Indians had been killing the other survivors. Not everyone, but many who surrendered didn't make it out of the slough. Lavina was then walked away with her captors. She said that fear had driven away all pain. She limped along as fast as she could, but was likely too slow. She noticed Pawn loading his gun, but she kept moving. A moment later, another crack. The ball went through her back, and then through her right forearm. It was the 4th time that she had been shot. She fell to the ground and struggled to crawl off the trail out of fear of being trampled by the horses. A moment later, face down, she heard the steps of an Indian walk up to her. He bashed the back of her head several times with the butt of his rifle. She laid as still as she could. She knew that any second she would feel a firm grasp of her hair and a knife run across her scalp. She didn't dare to breathe. She waited. But the knife never came, and the Indians left. Lavina laid there bleeding, but alive. Lavina stayed where she had been beaten for 3 hours in the pouring rain before moving. She was soaked and freezing. It was about 4 p.m. She thought that she had heard Merton calling for her, but was afraid to answer out of fear of both of them being discovered by Indians. She got herself to sit up, a systems check. She was covered in blood. Her head hurt. It must have been her thick hair that saved her. What happens next feels like hell, if she hadn't already experienced it. She heard injured people calling out, people that she knew. Lavina made her way to her feet. She had been shot 4 times. Her foot is in bad shape on top of being without shoes. She was shot through the side and arm. She could hardly use it, but she was determined to find her children, if any were still alive. She made her way back to the slough, passing the bodies of the dead and dying. These were her friends, and the children of her friends. It is clear that some had been tortured and abused before the Indians left. She took clothes off the dead to try to keep warm, a process that with only one working arm and her other wounds took time. Her skirt had been badly torn, and she had to hold it up, but holding it with her left arm meant that she had to let her injured right arm dangle, which was excruciating. She was able to take pins off the body of Mrs. Ireland, Tommy's wife, to secure her skirt. She must have been killed after Lavina had seen her praying with her husband. Then she found her son Giles. He had been shot through the chest. He was dead. But worse, she found Frank. He wasn't. He laid face down, breathing heavy, with several gunshot wounds. Lavina wrote, "I knew that he was then dying, and could not live long. I wished to lie down and die beside my sweet boy. But she couldn't. She knew that Giles and Freddie were dead. But what about Merton, her oldest, and baby Johnny? They could still be out there. She had a horrible choice. Lay there and die with Frank, or find her other 2 boys. So she left him there, praying that soon God would release him from his pain." This part of the story is a complete horror show. In an attempt to keep this video as short as possible and not retread the same ground, I'm leaving a ton of it out. Lavina details the people she encounters, and what really gets you is the ones that are still alive, desperate and begging for help. And Lavina is in no position to help them. Remember, it's pouring rain. She is severely injured herself, and she just lost her husband, 2 of her sons, and is in the process of leaving another for dead because it is in fact the best option she has. Oh, and the people who did this? They might be behind the next blade of grass, ready to, in the best of circumstances, kidnap you. But with her injuries, they wouldn't do that. That's why Pond shot her leaving the slough to begin with. Just a goddamn nightmare. Lavina searched all night for Merton and Johnny, but never found them. Once it was day, scared of Indians, she hid in the grass. And it was a good thing, because in the distance, she heard them. A camp, with prisoners. Lavina feared Merton and Johnny were with them. She heard cries of the captured that would go silent after gunshots. She was sure that all of her sons were dead. By nightfall, it had stopped raining. Lavina decided to make her way to a friend's house on Buffalo Lake. It was far, 16 miles from Lake Shetek, but she thought it could be safe, and from there she could get help. Despite some initial wrong turns, she made it to Buffalo Lake by 11 a.m. the following day, Friday, August 22nd. She was still hiding most of the time in the daylight. By the lake, some birds near her spooked. She feared that meant Indians were coming, but to her relief it was a mail carrier. She revealed herself, and he initially thought she was an Indian. But after some initial confusion, he helped her to her friend's house. There she found another survivor, Tommy Ireland, the man shot by the Indians when he was begging for them to spare their lives. And he had news. Merton and Johnny were alive. Tommy Ireland was severely injured. His wife was killed, as was one of his children, and another was taken captive. Shortly after Lavina was taken captive by Pawn and the other Dakota, Merton talked to Tommy, and he was carrying Johnny. He had stayed hidden in the slough when the Indians called everyone out. Merton told Tommy that he was going to carry Johnny as far as he could to get away. Tommy tried to go with him, but passed out from blood loss. He had been shot in the chest and arm. Tommy had stayed in the slough for just over a day before he awoke and found that, miraculously, he could walk. He had made it to Buffalo Lake just a little before Lavina. Remember, she had taken some wrong turns. That night it had stormed again. But in the morning, Lavina, Tommy Ireland, and the mail carrier set out in the direction they thought Merton and Johnny would be going. Over the course of the next day, they followed the way to a nearby city, New Ulm. They believed that that was where Merton was heading, and it was a place where they felt they could be safe. It took over a day, but they found them. In 2 days, Merton hadn't eaten, and had carried his brother 50 miles to safety. When they first saw each other, Merton didn't say a word. Johnny was sleeping in his arms. Lavina just took the baby and hugged her sons. After what seemed like endless travel and horror, she had found them. In their travels, they were also reunited with another family, Mrs. Hurd and her children. She was one of the first that were attacked when the Dakota killed Voight, before telling her to leave. Things were starting to look like they were improving, but they weren't safe yet. Lavina, now reunited with her sons, is also joined by a small group of people. Tommy Ireland, the mail carrier, Mrs. Hurd, and her children. This group is still out in the wilderness and open to any attack should they encounter them. Most of the group was injured. Lavina had been shot 4 times. Tommy as well, through the chest and arm. Merton and Johnny hadn't eaten in days, just kids. Baby Johnny was so weak he could no longer walk. They reached a cabin in the area around noontime. They had to break in. It was fortified, but it hadn't been raided by Indians. Inside, they found food. A lot of it. The owners abandoned the cabin when they had heard of the attacks. And although it was perhaps careless to stay there, the mosquitoes made outside unbearable. They stayed here for 9 days, all except the mail carrier, who left in search of help on his own. Most of them were getting better. Baby Johnny could even walk again. But Lavina's foot had gotten bad enough that she couldn't walk at all. It was swollen. She either crawled or Merton helped her. Tommy Ireland had improved enough that he decided to set out for New Ulm by himself, and the next day a small contingent of 14 soldiers rescued them, after Tommy had gotten them a message. It was actually a rather dramatic scene. The soldiers didn't arrive until the middle of the night, and when they approached, the group inside the cabin obviously feared that it was Indians. But they were taken to New Ulm, and eventually in Mankato, in order to recover. Merton became something of an attraction among the soldiers. Everyone wanted to meet the 11-year-old boy who carried his baby brother 50 miles without food in order to survive an Indian attack. People gave him money. Lavina was able to recover there as well, even though her injuries would leave her foot and arm never quite the same. The Lake Shetek Massacre was just one small part in the larger Dakota War. When looking at the motivations of the Dakota, it's easy to understand why they revolted. They were being mistreated and their former lands invaded. But these are human stories. None of the policies put forth by the U.S. government were the decisions of the EASTLICK'S or the other families that were massacred. They were just people trying to make a better life for themselves. And over 350 civilians were killed. Lavina's story is just one of the many captured in the narrative by her. I encourage you to read it. I have linked a copy in the episode's description. Most of her family died, but it is miraculous that she, Johnny, and Merton lived through it. This picture of them, taken shortly after the tragedy, is just remarkable. As for the Dakota, not shockingly, things didn't end well for them. They were defeated after about a month. Ultimately, 38 of them were hanged for their role in the conflict, the largest single-day execution in American history, while the rest were forced to leave Minnesota. Those who didn't die were starved. But that's a story for another video. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you want to know more about the Dakota War, I actually did a video on that, and I'll have it up around here somewhere. Watch it. It's fun, in a bad things happened kind of way. And if you're a fan of the channel, my Patreon is linked in the episode description. Everything helps, and if you join, you are very appreciated. Thanks for watching.